We now return to the Windsors. Funding for the Windsors, a royal family, has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the annual financial support of viewers like you.
In July 1981, Charles, Prince of Wales, married Lady Diana Spencer. She was 19.
One had such hopes that, you know, she would really be the supportive wife that he needed, and that would give him all the encouragement that his job requires.
This is the embodiment of the nation, the Crown Prince in this instance, marrying a woman plucked from obscurity. They carry our expectations, our hopes, our fears, our anxieties, our prejudices. How long will it last? What are going to be the tensions? Will there be children? What will they be like? How are they going to survive? When will he be king?
Charles was only 3 when his mother became queen. The shy boy was overwhelmed by his destiny.
He seemed to be totally different from Princess Anne, because she would go wholeheartedly into it, but he would hesitate over many, many things. He would sort of be holding back. "Should I go, Nanny?" he would say. "Oh, well, yes, you can go, Nanny," like Body would say. So he would be rest assured if she gave him permission.
I think it has always been unfortunate that the chemistry between Prince Philip and Prince Charles has not been the same as the chemistry that exists between him and Princess Anne. Prince Charles tends much more to be intimidated.
Prince Philip was the dominant figure in his son's education. He saw to it that Charles left the safe world of governesses for boarding schools.
Dear little boy. And I felt very sorry for him being sent to Cheam, because I think that was rather tough. I don't mind saying that, because I think if you've been brought up at Buckingham Palace to suddenly go to quite a tough boarding school, horrid other little boys teasing one, I think that he did have rather a miserable time.
Philip sent him on to Gordonston, a bleak boarding school where his father had been a star.
He had a vision of what his son should be, and Charles didn't live up to it. He wanted a real man's man. He wanted a blunt, outspoken, sportsman, rough and tumble sort of guy. And I think that Charles grew up believing that he was not much good.
When he toured Australia, he found that princes are seldom short of company. At home, he had a series of friendships, but he remained uncommitted. There was one profound attraction to the young Camilla Shand. While he hesitated, she married Andrew Parker Bowles. Charles had lost her, but he couldn't let go.
I mean, people have said to me that he loved Camilla more than any woman before or since Diana.
In my position, you're going to marry somebody who perhaps one day is going to become queen. And you've got to choose somebody very carefully, I think, who could fulfill this particular role. Because people like you, perhaps, would expect quite a lot from somebody like that. And it's got to be somebody pretty special.
He was much more of a rather lonely, frustrated, quite timid figure, I think largely as a result of his very, very sheltered upbringing, than his public persona led people to believe, and totally haunted by his quest for a bride.
The pressure on Prince Charles to find a bride came from within him as much as anywhere, because he would realise that as the future king, he had to get married and produce heirs for the throne.
Prince Charles would always go fishing in the morning, and it was quite a good way of finding out if he'd got a girlfriend. Suddenly, I saw just the tip of a green-booted Wellington sticking out from behind a pine tree, and I could see this person had a makeup mirror in her hand and was doing nothing to her face, but was looking back across the river to see who or what was there.
This was the beginning of a long and fraught relationship between Lady Diana Spencer and the press. Charles's latest girlfriend, youngest daughter of the 8th Earl Spencer, was no stranger to royal life. But at first she was overwhelmed by the intensity of press scrutiny.
How well are you coping with all the press attention?
Well, as you can see, you can tell.
Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you.
Well, it is, naturally.
There were many restrictions on his choice. He couldn't marry a Catholic by law, couldn't marry a divorcee by tradition, couldn't marry a girl of blemished reputation, had to be a virgin.
The engagement was announced on the 24th of February, 1981.
Can you find the words to sum up how you feel today, both of you?
Difficult to find the right sort of word, isn't it, really? Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Yes.
She was extremely gentle, very shy, and she was someone that, as a young girl, you thought was everything a princess should be. Very beautiful, very young, very calm, and yet there was a certain nervousness about her.
For the family matriarchs, this was a perfect dynastic marriage.
Charles, Philip, Arthur, George, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her, so long as you both shall live?
I will.
I look back on the marriage of the Prince and Princess of Wales as one of the greatest things I've ever seen. There's a tremendous feeling of excitement about it, and it looked perfect. I saw no clouds on the horizon. I saw nothing but sunshine and happiness.
The celebrations were a fairy tale, but they took place against the grim reality of riots throughout the Queen's realm.
We were offered in very poignant juxtaposition two very different alternative images of England. On the one side we had the fairy tale wedding, and almost within the same week we had the riots at Toxteth and elsewhere in Britain, which presented a picture of a deprived, unhappy, disadvantaged population living in a nation that they were not proud to belong to.
At this time of social stress, the Queen continued with the rituals of state. But she herself was not immune to violence, even in the summer of the royal wedding. An unemployed youth fired 6 shots at the Queen during trooping the colour. They were blanks. The Queen calmed her horse and rode on. But more danger was not far away. A man was able to climb into Buckingham Palace and wander into the Queen's bedroom.
I passed the corgi food on the way. I saw corgi food. I knew, you know, I actually knew I was going to find the Queen's room straight away. So it was almost like boom, boom, boom. I was in the Queen's room within minutes.
The appalling problem it must have faced her with of how to keep apart this man with his thumb dripping with blood and her team of extremely excited corgis. Who knows what they could have done to him if they found out what was happening.
I drew back the curtain, look at the face, and it must have startled her. And she jumped up and said, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here? Get out, get out." So I was quite stunned, really.
In May 1982, the Queen's Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, sent a British task force south to the Falkland Islands to expel the Argentine invaders. It was a high-risk exercise.
The conflict in the Falkland Islands was thrust on us by naked aggression. And we are naturally proud of the way our fighting men are serving their country.
The fighting man most in her thoughts was her second son, Prince Andrew, who served as a helicopter pilot on the aircraft carrier Invincible.
We and our crew saw the ship hit, and I saw my ship, Invincible, fire her missiles. Normally I would have said it was a very spectacular thing to see, but at the same time it was very frightening having seen it from where I was.
There was considerable suggestion that Prince Andrew shouldn't go because of his position in the royal family. The Queen overruled that. She said, no, he's a serving officer, he must go, he must take his term with all the rest.
The Queen celebrated the end of the war as a mother, welcoming Prince Andrew home, down on the quayside.
We had both a head of state and a prime minister, both of whom were women. It was absolutely clear in most people's eyes which of those two women was the more dominant, and that was, of course, Thatcher.
It was Mrs. Thatcher, the victorious war leader, who took the salute at the city's welcome to the task force.
Everybody expected that Mrs. Thatcher, because she was a natural conservative and was always a very strong monarchist, would simply be completely deferential to the Queen. It was always said she curtsied very, very low, and this was an object of mockery, a private mockery at the palace.
There was a wider arena in which monarch and prime minister would clash.
With the world. The world.
The Queen's world was the Commonwealth.
I always had the feeling that the Queen was sure about the Commonwealth. She didn't have ambivalences. It wasn't something on the side. It was very central in her reign.
Mrs. Thatcher, on the other hand, was pretty scornful of it all. Chogham CHOGM, is Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and it happened periodically. And she and Charles Pole had a translation of this acronym, which was compulsory handouts for greedy mendicants. And, of course, that was quite private, but that was the attitude.
I think it's fair to say that the Queen didn't have a great affection for Mrs. Thatcher. She had the odd expression about her, which I found rather fascinating. I think there was a sense in which she was not at ease with some of the attitudes and policies of Mrs. Thatcher. And she, I think, saw Mrs. Thatcher as being somewhat dangerous to the cohesiveness of the British structure.
Well, do come in.
There were two different actors, and they were playing different roles. The Queen would have been absolutely unyielding in her positions, and I think Mrs. Thatcher would have said, "Leave the politics to me."
Well, at least I don't strut around in ludicrous little hats.
Yes, but you'd love to, wouldn't you?
How are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
How do you like Balmoral as a place?
Diana was a magnet to the press.
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
The attention was always on Diana.
Prince Charles thought this would be a 9-day wonder. He was quite happy, after 10 years of intense spotlight on himself, particularly over his quest for a bride, for that spotlight to divert on somebody else, but only temporarily.
Breaking with tradition, they took their first child, William, with them on an official tour of Australia. The glamorous new family revived old loyalties.
I saw, when Di first came, the way in which she was the focus, the centre of the attention of the crowds. And after all, with due respect to Charles, I mean, she's a somewhat more attractive personality in an outward sense. She was young, new, vibrant and different. And I could sense that at times that created some sort of tension between them, but there was nothing she could do to help that.
Diana was a kind of wish fulfillment of the 1980s. The way she blossomed, the way she became what the press christened Dynasty Di, it was like part of the 80s. She became enmeshed with the decade in the most extraordinary way. So that really, in the end, you could hardly tell whether you were looking at a soap opera on television or whether you were seeing Princess Di in real life.
She had done what she wanted. She had the children she wanted. Charles, on the other hand, I think was going into, I suppose, a midlife crisis. Charles was still in waiting. Charles had no proper role.
I don't think that it's a miserable condition, being heir to the throne, and people talk about it hanging around with nothing to do. I think the heir to the throne's got just as much to do if he chooses to do it as the sovereign.
But what is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much loved and elegant friend.
Charles offended some professionals and politicians when he spoke out for harmony in architecture and for social cohesion. But his network of charities and his commitment to the renewal of the ravaged inner cities gave him the means to reach out to the people.
The Prince of Wales, actually, to do him justice, has made pretty good use. I think he's made some mistakes, but he has made very substantial use of his opportunities.
In 1986, the Queen's extrovert second son, now created Duke of York, stepped into the limelight. Another royal wedding was at hand. The bride was Sarah Ferguson, known as Fergie.
Like Diana, the product of a broken marriage. Unlike Diana, a girl with a past. She'd lived with a man the royal family broke through another barrier by this not being a problem.
Princess Diana watched as more vows of love and fidelity were made.
Andrew, Albert, Christian Edward.
To my wedded husband.
Fergie's problem was that she was unable to adapt her, let's say, natural joie de vivre and exuberance and high spirits into the decorum required of a member of the royal family.
The Windsors took Fergie's exuberance on board, but it came at a price.
The younger members of the royal family, for the best reasons in the world, wanted to make the monarchy more approachable, more with it. And I think the supreme example of that was in 1986 when they all participated in a royal knockout. It was making it a soap opera.
Prince Edward, the Queen's youngest son, dropped out of the Marines and went into the entertainment business. He staged a TV game show for charity.
And after 14 hours of sitting in the rain and the wind and on a miserable June day, we were invited to a marquee where Prince Edward deigned to speak to us.
Well, thanks for sounding so bloody enthusiastic. What have you been doing in here all day? Have you been watching it? Yeah. What did you think of it? Thanks.
I thought it was... And he flounced out like a ballerina with a hole in his tights. And we were not impressed by that behaviour at all. And it's one of those occasions where people like to attack the press. We were just really observers at the royal family self-destructing.
The observers found good copy in the adventures of the Duchess of York when she hit America.
Of course, Princess Fergie said people sniggered at her. Well, she did make mistakes. Of course she made mistakes, so she wasn't told. People need guidance when they're in a place like that. Of course we all got guidance. If you go to Buckingham Palace, you want guidance. You don't want to just walk in and think you're going to behave normally, because you don't. It's not normal. Nothing's normal about it.
All these men around here.
Love you!
I'll see you later.
I was very fond of her. I thought she was a splendid girl, but I think basically unsuited to the task of being a royal princess in any time, not any modern times.
People in Britain want the royal family to go and be cold in Scotland and get wet in Balmoral and traipse about in ill-fitting, uncomfortable clothes and have a generally miserable time. And then we don't mind that they're the royal family. You know, they can do the official functions and then go and be miserable and Scottish and Victorian, and that's fine. But when they start going to the Caribbean and going skiing and doing things that we want to do, then people get rather irritated.
We have, in a sense, moved into a new world for the monarchy, a harsher world, a less happy world, a less deferential world.
The British press fed ravenously on royal scandal. The Duchess of York had already separated from her husband when marauding photographers discovered her consulting with her financial advisor by a French pool. The photographs were spread across the Daily Mirror. The Duchess and her children made a swift and abject departure from Balmoral. Stolen love letters from Princess Anne to a royal equerry had already been discovered. But the toughest of the young royals knew how to deal with the press.
Daily Mirror.
Never been mentioned by anybody.
Princess Anne was granted a divorce and went on to marry the equerry. All this could have been endured, but not the visible collapse of the marriage of the Prince of Wales himself. On their tour of India, Diana went to visit that great monument to love, the Taj Mahal, alone. Alone except for the press. She was becoming expert in the ways of the media. Diana felt trapped in the royal routines. To reveal her loneliness and despair, she secretly sent tapes to the journalist Andrew Morton, who told her story to the world.
This astonishing tale poured out about Diana, how she'd suffered from bulimia, how she'd made these various failed suicide attempts, how Charles had been consumed with a passion for Camilla Parker Bowles, which had, in Diana's eyes, been the cancer which had been at the heart of their marriage.
The prince's friends were outraged by the book.
Plainly, it was a turning point in royal reporting, and I don't think it does any good to go back over, you know, raking through the ashes. But plainly, it was very damaging, and it declared open season, I think, on the royal family.
Well, these are the pictures we've got of Di looking very, very sad.
The Sun now decided to publish the tape of a mysteriously recorded telephone conversation it had long possessed.
It's just so difficult, so complicated. It makes my life real torture, I've decided.
It was recognised to be Princess Diana in conversation with a male admirer, James Gilby, and it revealed the depths of Diana's alienation.
I thought, bloody hell, what I done for this family. What's really quite whatever the word is his grandmother always looking at me with a sort of strange look in her eyes. It's not hatred, it's sort of interest and pity or mixed in one.
We now discover, as has really always been true, that monarchs and their families are on the whole no more virtuous and admirable than the rest of us. A lot of people are dismayed by this development because they would like to believe that their monarchs and royal families are more admirable. On the whole, it seems to me to be a healthy development. The point has been long since been passed where we need a monarchy which will cushion us from the realities of the world. It seems to me that what we need is a monarchy which will help us face the realities of the world.
But the monarchy itself had trouble facing harsh realities. Windsor Castle caught fire. The repair bill was enormous, and the government offered to pay from the public purse. The taxpayers' response on the morning after gave the Queen much more than a bad cold.
Polls the next day showed 95% of the British people saying, why should we pay for a palace that we pay to maintain? She didn't take out her fire insurance. If my house burns down and I haven't taken out fire insurance, is the Queen going to pay for it?
I think the Queen was very shaken by the Windsor fire, obviously because it had been her childhood home, but secondly, and very importantly, because it did bring home to her the feeling of the people that was not by any means as pro-monarchy as it had been. And I think this was a big shock.
The fire reignited a smouldering public resentment that the Windsors paid no tax on their private fortune, while their civil list allowances also grew.
"1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis."
The Queen responded and now volunteered to pay tax on her private income and take some minor royals off the public payroll. Even then, she knew that another painful decision was to come.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children.
Diana had told the world that the Prince of Wales was obsessed with Camilla Parker Bowles. Now a second tape emerged, in which they talked as only lovers do.
I knew it would revive me. I can't bear a Sunday night without you.
Oh, God. Sometimes I need you several times a week.
So do I. I need you all the week. All the time.
Charles was the victim of a cruel intrusion. Some of his critics were merciless.
I think that Charles was terribly hurt by the criticism he received, and this was, I expect now we've forgotten, on a daily basis and extremely hostile. And I think he wanted to be understood.
Charles decided to present himself in a more positive way. He cooperated in a television documentary about his life.
I think that most people in court circles thought that, OK, do a programme on yourself, fine, try and popularise yourself, but don't go into the private life. Don't make those admissions. You know, you're on a hiding to nothing here, hostages to fortune.
Well, the disastrous thing was admitting to adultery. That was really, and a terrible thing to do from the point of view of Camilla Parker Bowles. I mean, was she consulted before he said that? One wonders.
Even on the night of his documentary, Diana upstaged Charles, as she often did. She secretly plotted revenge, an interview on Panorama. It would be her decisive break with the palace, which she thought had sidelined her.
She won't go quietly, that's the problem. I'll fight till the end, because I believe that I have a role to fulfill. And I got 2 children to bring up.
Diana was very acute about the impact she made on people. Like all good actresses, she knew, and she was a good actress, she knew exactly what effect she was having on people.
Well, I just saw her, in a sense, obviously justifying her personal position. I think she wanted to say what she thought and wanted that on the record, and she did that in the way that she felt was most powerful.
Do you think the Prince of Wales will ever be king?
I don't think any of us know the answer to that. And obviously it's a question that's in everybody's head. I would think that the top job, as I call it, would bring enormous limitations to him. And I don't know whether he could adapt to that.
Would it be your wish that when Prince William comes of age that he were to succeed the Queen rather than the current Prince of Wales?
My wish is that my husband finds peace of mind. And from that follows other things, yes.
By questioning Charles' place in the line of succession, Diana had publicly challenged the monarchy. The princess, who had vowed not to go quietly, was ejected from the royal family in a costly divorce and stripped of her title.
I thought it was a great mistake to take the HRH title away from the Princess of Wales. I thought it was incorrect because, I mean, she was the mother of probable future king, and she had that title by virtue of having been married to the Prince of Wales. I thought it was a great mistake, and it made her seem a sort of martyr, and I didn't think she was a martyr, really. I mean, she was doing pretty well in other respects out of that divorce. I mean, a huge settlement and so on. And I just thought that was it looked petty.
The royal family restricted Diana to a few formal appearances. She looked for a new role.
I think she felt very much after the disaster of the Panorama interview, and a good many negative images which she'd thrown off, that there was need to see something constructive.
Diana wanted to be the Queen of Hearts, To many people, that's what she became.
People say, did she have different motives which were about her own situation? Well, I'm not a therapist, I don't know. I mean, certainly from my perspective, she always seemed very genuinely interested. She'd been genuinely interested in AIDS for a long time, way back in the 1980s, which was when I first met her. This was one of her first interests, really, beyond being a handshaking princess.
She was having, I understand, talks with the Prime Minister with a view to some kind of position.
I don't think she had a marvellous understanding of who was who in the Labour Party, but I think she knew how courts worked, and she understood that getting close to people who were close to Tony Blair was the thing to do.
In the summer of 1997, Diana's views on politics made the headlines. She both shunned and courted the press. Charles's awkward photo opportunities with his sons seemed to come from another world. Diana's life in the headlines was one of permanent exposure. In the company of playboy Dodi Fayed, the pace became ever more frantic.
This is BBC Radio in London. Buckingham Palace has confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. In a statement, it said the Queen and Prince Philip were deeply shocked.
Later that Sunday, Prince Charles and Diana's sister Jane flew to Paris to bring her body home. In Britain, people were struggling to come to terms with the news.
She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
At Balmoral, the Queen and her family went stoically about the Sabbath. Diana was not mentioned in their prayers, although her sons were present. Royal protocol ruled.
The royal family should have remembered she's the mother of the future king. But I think that if you're a monarch, your mind and your advisors think very much along traditional lines, what was done before, what is the precedent, and that's how they operate. They don't perhaps take the imaginative leaps that they should.
Within hours, it was clear that the public wanted a national lament. By the time Diana's body came home, the Blair government feared the Windsors were showing signs of misjudging the public mood.
One of the sort of first issues was what to do with Diana's body when it came back, and everyone had assumed that she would go and lie in a royal chapel, of which there were, many around and about. And the Queen was of the view that this shouldn't happen because she was not a royal personage. Now, this was a very early indication of where Charles, to his credit, without having to be told by Blair and his spin doctors, realised that the right, proper thing to do was that Diana be taken to a royal palace. And what's the alternative? That she'd be taken to, some sort of, funeral parlour off the A1. I mean, and nobody in Buckingham Palace actually thought any of this through.
It was a situation without parallel. The government's press spokesman, Alistair Campbell, studied the public mood.
Alistair Campbell and Angie Hunter, who had to go from Downing Street to Buckingham Palace to have all these meetings about the funeral, were going through the crowds, and Alistair reported back to Blair that it was like when you come out of a football match and a team has lost and there is something in the air, there's a crackle in the air. And what I think he was getting at was that it was completely conceivable that there was a potential way for this to go that could involve violence, riots.
It was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in my lifetime in this country. It was just a wave of emotion, unthinking emotion. They blamed the royal family in some way for her death. That if they'd been kinder to her, she wouldn't have gone off with Dodi Fayed. And, you know, if Prince Charles had been a good husband to her, this wouldn't have happened.
The swelling crowds were angry that there was no flag at half-mast at the palace. The press played relentlessly on the theme of absent royalty.
Royalty, as well as private individuals, in my view, have a right to nurse grief privately. And that's where I think the tabloids were wrong in saying that the Queen totally failed in her duty in not making a bigger public declaration about grief. It's not, whether you like it or not, it's not the way the royal family comports itself.
But the message had got through, and the royal family returned to London early. Diana's brothers-in-law were the first to emerge amongst the crowds.
When they agreed to the walkabout, what they agreed was that Andrew and Edward would go out first and see what happened. Now, I'll tell you this, Blair and Campbell and the Queen, right, were watching that to see what happened. Would they be jostled, spat at? I mean, people had been ringing Buckingham Palace and swearing at whoever answered the phone. Now, as it happened, the deference of the great British people took over, and everyone sort of immediately doffed their cap and said, "Ooh, you know, now they're here, we're going to treat them like the royalty they are." And so it was diffused. And of course, they did always have the ace up their sleeve of the two boys, because they weren't seen as part of the House of Windsor. They were seen as her kids. Ironic, because of course they literally are the future of the House of Windsor.
Charles. Charles.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
William. William.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hold on.
William, we love you.
Love you.
After the walkabout, the Queen was to broadcast to the nation, and the palace planned the usual arrangements.
When the palace officials finally agreed to facilitate that, they said she's going to do it at 4 o'clock, and Alistair Campbell said, well, that's no good, she needs to do it live into the tea time news, and one of them turned around and said, the Queen does not do live.
We cross now live to Buckingham Palace for the Queen's tribute to Princess Diana.
The words owed much to Alistair Campbell.
Since last Sunday's dreadful news, we have seen throughout Britain and around the world.
The draft of her speech came into Downing Street, and there was no emotion in it at all. But Alistair, being very smart, managed to get phrases like, you know, as a grandmother, I know that, blah, 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 and all those kind of things into the speech.
No one who knew Diana will ever forget her. Millions of others who never met her, but felt they knew her, will remember her. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death.
In her speech, she made very positive remarks about the Princess of Wales, but she never actually said that she loved her. She refrained from saying that, but she said she admired her, which I'm sure was true.
I thought it was a very good illustration of the Queen's character. The tabloids had done their very best to humiliate her, tell her she got it all wrong, done the wrong thing by the people, boo, boo the Queen. And I think most of us would have simply said, to hell with them, I'll do it my way. Instead of which, the Queen stood outside the palace, bowed her head as the cortege went past.
Diana had not gone quietly, but with the pomp of a state funeral in all but name. The royal family was subdued. At the royal golden wedding in that same autumn, the Queen and Tony Blair reached out together to the public.
Hello. Where are you from?
At the anniversary dinner, the Queen promised to take account of the restless national mood.
I have done my best with Prince Philip's constant love and help to interpret it correctly through the years of our marriage and of my reign as your Queen. And we shall, as a family, try together to do so in the future.
The family regrouped around its oldest member. The Queen Mother's centenary was a milestone no monarch had passed before. The old lady had first appeared on this balcony in 1923. Her family, smaller, shrunken by scandal and tragedy, gathered to celebrate her survival and their own.
If we look at the history of the monarchy from the 1830s to the present day, one point above all others stands out, and that is that the present Queen's reign, when taken as a whole, is very much Queen Victoria's reign, but in reverse. In Queen Victoria's reign, the British monarchy began as a small-scale thing and became grander and grander and grander. In the present Queen's reign, it began very grand and it's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. Or at least it ought to be becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. But making things smaller is much harder than making things bigger.
The last Empress of India, the Queen Mother has lived through this century of gradual decline. Her family's link with the more heroic age has proved to be its most durable asset, for all who can remember.
There have been 3 royal stars in this century. The previous Prince of Wales, who became Edward VIII, the Princess of Wales, Princess Diana, and another, the Queen Mother.
The royal family's official portrait shows the group around the Queen Mother as smaller, less formal, and with a new dominant figure, Prince William, whose inheritance includes his dead mother's glamour.
I think we mustn't assume that because he looks like his mother, he's like his mother in all respects. That I think we mustn't assume.
The attention falls on William in carefully restricted photocalls. But it's his father, Prince Charles, who's the heir to the throne. Most of Charles's life will be over before he could inherit the crown, and his uneasiness is compounded by the unresolved status of his faithful friend, Camilla Parker Bowles. While Charles hesitates in his long wait for the crown, the Queen endures. She may be uneasy with the new rituals of cool Britannia, but she's been revered by generations who have lived and died in her service.
I've known the Queen now since November 1949, and I remember meeting her in the drawing room at Clarence House, and I can remember exactly what she was dressed in, a wonderful blue dress. She was wearing Queen Mary's great sapphire diamonds. And I fell for her. Sorry. Simply for the sake of the monarchy, it is my firm view that the Queen should live forever.
The Queen moves on to her Jubilee, and the monarchy to a destination unknown.
You can purchase the Windsors on video for $29.95 plus shipping and handling. To order this 4-hour series, call WGBH Boston Video at 1-800-255-9424. Funding for the Windsors, a royal family, has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the annual financial support of viewers like you.
This is PBS.